at least 2 blocks, and we started running floor by floor instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
Plan to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
I looked and I could see the corner, and it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, "How fast?" I go, "Like firecrackers."
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall. It sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions. And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion.
Hello, and welcome to the Coalescence documentary series, Episode 1, How I Became a Conspiracy Theorist. I'm your host, Joseph DeMarco. In his prophetic novel, 1984, author George Orwell wrote, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." A 2009 article published in the Open Chemical Physics Journal entitled "Active Thermetic Material Discovered in Dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center Catastrophe" began with the following statement. The destruction of the 3 skyscrapers on September 11, 2001 was an immensely tragic catastrophe that not only impacted thousands of peoples and families directly due to injury and loss of life, but also provided the motivation for numerous expensive and radical changes in domestic and foreign policy. For these and other reasons, knowing what really happened that fateful day is of grave importance. One might assume that a peer-reviewed scientific paper debunking the official story of 9/11 would make international headlines on the very day it was published, but it never did. Considering the implications of their findings, one might believe that after being snubbed by the mainstream media, the scientists who wrote the paper would be invited onto a popular podcast, such as the Joe Rogan Experience. But that'll never happen. According to the official story, on the morning of September 11, 2001, a handful of radical Muslims armed with box cutters hijacked 4 passenger planes and flew 2 of those aircraft into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center complex in downtown New York. Despite the fact that the towers were engineered to withstand the impact of a fully fueled jumbo jet, within hours of being hit, both towers suffered total structural failure and disappeared into their own footprint. Before delving into the overwhelming body of scientific evidence and eyewitness testimony that invariably debunks the official explanation for why the Twin Towers collapsed, let's first take a look at the 3rd tower that fell down that day, World Trade Center 7. If you have never heard of Building 7, you're certainly not alone. Although it was never even hit by an airplane and had suffered only minor damage after being struck by falling debris from the North Tower, at 5:20 that afternoon, WTC-7 fell straight down into its own footprint at virtual free fall speed. And if you think the collapse of WTC-7 resembles a controlled demolition, once again, you're certainly not alone.
For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Yet Dan Rather is just a news anchor. Maybe it would make more sense to listen to the opinion of Dutch demolitions expert Danny Jowenko. In the following clip, simply observe Jowenko's unscripted reaction upon viewing footage of WTC-7 collapsing for his first time.
Zie je vanaf boven gaan? Nee, je gaat vanaf onder.
Die gaat vanaf onder, ja.
Toch? Ja. Ze hebben gewoon kolommen weggeblazen. Er is nagesprongen.
Dit valt anders dan het World Trade Center.
Vind je niet dan?
Ja, je ziet het, de onderste verdiepingen gaan eerst.
Ja, en de rest zakt er gewoon in. Dus dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten.
Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Maar dit is ook op 11 september gebeurd.
Dezelfde dag?
Dezelfde dag.
Dezelfde dag? Weet je dat zeker?
Ja.
Was het zeker weten de 11e? Dat kan geen waar zijn.
7 uur nadat de World Trade Center naar beneden viel.
Ja?
The reason Jowenko is so shocked by the footage of WTC-7 is because, as the owner of a world-renowned demolitions company, he realized that having a steel structure implode into its own footprint requires precisely placed explosives and weeks, if not months, of preparation by highly skilled individuals. Now, if a 47-story steel building experienced total structural failure as a result of office fires on any other day, it would have certainly sent shockwaves through the engineering world. Yet because it happened on September 11th, 2001, the story of WTC-7 was quickly buried by the mainstream media, now beating the drums of war. In fact, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, did not even address the collapse of WTC-7 until 2008, and only as a direct result of growing public outrage. During the much-anticipated press conference following the release of their report, NIST spokesperson Sham Sunder began his presentation with the following statement.
Before I tell you what we found, I'd like to tell you what we did not find. We did not find any evidence that explosives were used in the collapse of Building 7. We ran down detailed computer simulations of blast scenarios. What you see in this slide are the expected air pressures from the smallest possible blast capable of crippling a critical column. This size blast would have produced an incredibly loud sound that was not recorded on videos of the collapse nor reported by witnesses.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
Inside the lobby.
We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, there was this big explosion.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
Then there was secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
And as I approached, came down, saw the big hubbub going on around Building 7, walked around it, saw a hole. I didn't see a hole bad enough to knock a building down, though. So, yeah, there was definitely fire in the building, but I didn't hear any, maybe this is movie crap. I didn't hear any creaking, or I didn't hear any indication that it was going to come down. And all of a sudden, the radios exploded, and everybody started screaming, "Get away, get away, get away from it!" And I was like a deer in the headlights, and I look up, and things started peeling in on itself, and there was an umbrella of crap 7 feet over my head that I just stared at. And somebody grabbed my shoulder, and I started running, and the shit's hitting the ground behind me. And the whole time you're hearing thum, 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 thum. So I think I know an explosion when I hear it, So yeah, I want to know what took that building down. I don't think it was a fire, and it certainly wasn't a plane.
In general, tall buildings are very safe. We have decades upon decades of real-life experience to prove this. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 on 9/11 was a rare event. Our study has identified thermal expansion as a new phenomenon that can cause the collapse of a structure. For the first time, we have shown that fire can induce a progressive collapse.
Yet if NIST concluded that the collapse of WTC-7 was a rare event and a new phenomena, then why prior to its collapse was foreknowledge of its impending destruction circulating amongst first responders at ground zero? Oddly, not only were the first responders told that the building was going to fall over hours before it actually did, but many claim to have even heard a countdown immediately preceding the collapse.
The Red Cross rep was like, he goes over and he says, well, you got to stay behind this line because they're thinking about bringing the building down. They didn't say what building, they just said bringing a building down. So we're like, okay, we'll take their word before it, we'll stay behind the line. And he went over and he talked to one of the, through all the commotion, he goes over and he asked one of the Red Cross, or one of the firefighters, what was going on. I guess, I don't know if he got an answer or not. He came back over with his hand over the radio, and it sounded like a countdown. And at the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1, and he was just saying, just run for your life, just run for your life. And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds, you heard explosions, like, boom! There's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was a boom, like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Evidence of explosions in WTC-7 is also corroborated by Barry Jennings, one of the very last people to exit the building before it fell. In fact, Jennings needed to be rescued by firefighters after he became trapped on the 8th floor as the result of an explosion in the stairwell. Yet, as you will notice in the following interview conducted prior to his suspicious death due to unknown circumstances, not only did Jennings report hearing explosions in WTC-7, but he emphatically states that these explosions occurred prior to the collapse of the towers. This is problematic, since according to the official story, the damage to WTC-7 was the result of falling debris from the collapsing towers.
No. What happened was, when we made it back to the 8th floor, as I told you earlier,
yes,
both buildings were still standing, because I looked one way, looked the other way, now there's nothing there. When I got to the 6th floor, before all this happened, when I got to the 6th floor, there was an explosion. That's what forced us back to the 8th floor. Both buildings were still standing. Keep in mind, I told you the fire department came and ran. They came twice. Why? Because building tower 1 fell, then tower 2 fell. And then when they came back with all concern now, like, to get me the hell out of there. And they did. When I got home, I sat down in front of the TV, and my wife said, why do you keep watching this? I couldn't stop watching it. And that's when I found out Building 7 came down. I was so surprised. And I'm saying to myself, why did that building come down? And I knew why it came down, because of the explosions. And it was not no fuel oil tanks.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires, similar to those we have seen in other tall buildings, caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires. This is the first time that we're aware of that a building over 15 stories tall has collapsed primarily due to fire.
Equally problematic is that if the collapse of WTC-7 was, as NIST claims, an extraordinary event, then why did several news outlets report it had fallen down before it actually did? In this iconic footage from that morning, you will notice that the BBC's Jane Stanley is reporting on the collapse of WTC-7, also known as the Salomon Brothers building, while the building remains standing in the background.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. It seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them. A lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched.
Coincidentally, the BBC loses their feed with the reporter shortly thereafter, almost as though someone at the station realized they had gotten a little bit ahead of the script.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan.
Also contradicting NIST's explanation regarding the collapse of WTC-7 is a more recent scientific study authored by structural engineer and PhD Leroy Halsley, entitled A Structural Reevaluation of the Collapse of World Trade Center 7. In the report, Halsley notes, "The principal conclusion of our study is that fire did not cause the collapse of WTC-7 on 9/11, contrary to the conclusions of NIST and private engineering firms that studied the collapse. The secondary conclusion of our study is that the collapse of WTC-7 was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of every column in the building." Yet, as the following highly qualified professionals explain, the simultaneous failure of every column could not have occurred without the use of pre-planted explosives. Nor could a steel building achieve free fall acceleration speed as it collapses unless all structural resistance had somehow been eliminated.
I'm Ed Moniak, licensed fire protection engineer for at least 25 years, and I work for a number of organizations, city, federal, large insurance companies, consultant, always in the area of fire safety, and with the goal of keeping the public safe and first responders safe. And at present, I'm working in the city of San Jose as a fire protection engineer. I just needed to resolve some of these inconsistencies in my own mind. And so I undertook a study of high-rise buildings, that the history over the last 20 or 30 years. And there's been a number of major high-rise fires. And what I found that nothing has ever been close to structural performance that was exhibited on 9/11, and even one collapse, progressive global collapse, as they call it, would have been extraordinary. But to have three occur in one day was just beyond comprehension. The conclusion of the NIST report was that a single flaw occurred, and that cascaded and progressed very quickly, so the whole building collapsed. No high-rise building has a single link that when it fails, the whole building comes down. Registered architects, engineers, designers, even the greediest developer would never build a building that would come down with one single link breaking. So it's fiction to say that a building as modern as World Trade Center 7 comes down with no resistance, a free fall, which is that's been measured. Just about the same speed as a hunk of iron dropping, and that's just ludicrous.
My name is Scott Granger. I'm a licensed fire protection engineer. I'm licensed in 13 states. I've been in private practice for 25 years. I've been a practicing engineer for 39 years. 50% of my practice is in forensic engineering. About 20% of my practice is in fire and building code analysis work, and 10% of my practice is in structural fire protection, structural fireproofing work. Steel structural frame buildings, high-rise buildings, simply do not collapse due to fire. There has never been until 9/11 an experience where a high-rise building that was steel frame completely collapsed. There have been fires burned longer in similar structures without any collapse. These small fires, scattered as they were, none of which would have been, in my experience as a fire protection engineer, hot enough to sufficiently soften the steel or damage the steel to result in a total collapse of the building. According to NIST, the failure occurred at column 79 on level 12. This means basically they're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building. That just does not make any sense.
My name's Tom Sullivan. I worked for Controlled Demolition Incorporated, CDI, the top-rated explosives demolition firm in the world, owned by the Loiseau family during the years surrounding 9/11. And I worked for them as an explosives loader for 2.5 years. As an explosives loader, my job was to place explosives in the buildings to prepare them for demolition. I was licensed while in New York by the New York Fire Department to handle explosives. And I worked on major projects such as Seattle Kingdom, the Three River Stadium, Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and Keyspan gas holders in New York, among others. The story that just a few columns can cause a synchronized global collapse, an implosion, is, well, that's just nonsense. I knew from day one that this was a controlled event. And why I did that is because simply looking at Building 7, you have a sudden collapse of the building. It's fairly symmetrical as it comes down. There's the classic kink, which means that the center core fails first, and you can see that on the video, and the building falls near free fall. So I really honestly didn't believe this from day one.
Note the kink in the east penthouse and the progression of the screening wall and the west penthouse collapsing from east to west. Here's our structural model showing the building collapsing, which matches quite well with the video of the event.
To create the 3D model, NIST claimed to have input more than 3 million separate elements into a computer program that they themselves developed, and that the software was so sophisticated it had required 8 months to complete a single run of the simulation on very powerful computers. Yet if someone assumes that scientists on the government payroll are immune from corruption, then they may want to compare NIST's simulation to the one created by Professor Halsey and his team at the University of Alaska Fairbanks and ask themselves, which simulation looks more convincing? And whereas researchers at the University of Alaska included all their modeling data with their report, NIST refused to release their data, claiming that releasing it would pose a threat to public safety.
Ron Brookman, licensed structural engineer in California, and I received my master's degree in structural engineering from University of California at Davis in 1986. I've been practicing structural engineering ever since then, nearly 24 years now, and have designed and retrofitted numerous steel frame structures. My experience includes commercial, office buildings, manufacturing facilities, industrial buildings. There were 24 columns in the interior and I think 58 on the perimeter. It's a lot of columns. You have one column fail and there are many other columns that are going to remain standing. The Freedom of Information Act allows us to write to NIST and request information. and I've done this on 3 occasions now. My first request was for information related to the collapse area, or the collapse initiation area on the 13th floor, and the shear studs. So I'm trying to study the local area where NIST, where they claim the collapse began. I want to see exactly if their explanation makes sense. And I've had a lot of trouble getting information. They claim that the information I'm looking for is not available. So that was the first FOIA request. The third FOIA request was for the calculations that proved the collapse initiation. And I didn't expect computer files. I just expected some calculations, maybe a couple of sheets, half a dozen pages, something where they came to the conclusion and proved that thermal expansion actually caused the collapse to begin. And they denied the request and said that, well, they sent me a disk with computer files on it, input files for the ANSYS analysis, which I didn't request, but they said that all of the remaining files and the output for the analysis was not available, and they were withholding that information because of concerns about public safety. And the NIST director has the right to withhold information if he discovers, or if he determines that it could jeopardize public safety. How would this jeopardize public safety? I'm looking at it from a public safety point of view. I would like to resolve this whole issue in my mind and in the mind of many people that don't agree with the NIST conclusions. I would like to see this whole thing resolved so that we can move on, and so that we can feel safe in our high-rise buildings. I don't feel that safe in our high-rise buildings sometimes when I know that things like this are going on. But I asked that question of NIST. How in the director's judgment would release of these calculations jeopardize public safety? Now, I never got a response on that question from the director of NIST. I did get a response on that question from the senior communications officer at NIST. And his response was that if these files were released, that this would provide groups of people with the ability to predict high-rise building collapses, and it could be considered a threat to public safety. I'm not kidding. That was what the most recent letter I've received from NIST said. And that implies that anybody who requests or demands these calculations is a threat to public safety. And I find that just totally unbelievable. It's implausible. It can't get any more ridiculous than that.
And if you thought that the evidence related to WTC7 could not get any more problematic, that is only because you've never heard the tale of Lucky Larry Silverstein, the New York business mogul whom had acquired the lease for World Trade Center 1 and 2 and doubled the insurance policy on the buildings just 6 short months prior to the tragedy. Although every morning Silverstein habitually ate breakfast in a restaurant located in the World Trade Center, on the morning of 9/11 he was uncharacteristically absent from work. And while later that afternoon, firefighters, police officers, and paramedics were frantically searching through the rubble pile looking for survivors, Lucky Larry was already on the phone with his insurance company, arguing that the two aircraft impacts constituted two separate insurance claims. In the end, Silverstein was awarded the largest insurance settlement in history, profiting $4.5 billion from the tragedy. And before you attribute Larry's good fortune to mere coincidence, you may want to listen to an interview he gave after 9/11, in which, reflecting on the events of that day, he claimed to have been part of the decision to pull the building. This is problematic because pulling a building is a demolitions term and, once again, is a task that requires weeks, if not months of preparation.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
When I watch him speak, I can only speculate that in his hubris, Silverstein simply drifted off script, becoming trapped in a lie. But why speculate when we have science?
I'm just curious, you could probably talk for another 8 hours, and there will be a certain number of folks who just won't buy it. What do you say to them, as generally speaking?
Well, I think the general sense is first of all, we are technical experts. We all have impeccable technical credentials, both in the private sector experts who work with us and the experts working at NIST. And I would say that the information we have, the science that we have, and the findings that we have are incredibly conclusive in terms of the fact that fires were, in fact, the primary cause of why World Trade Center 7 building collapsed. Alternative theories are really, none of them have been found to be credible in terms of why these buildings collapsed. And in fact, I would suggest that the public should really, at this point, recognize the science is really behind what we have said.
My name is Lynn Margulis. I've been doing science every day since I was about 16 years old. I teach at the University of Massachusetts. I have a PhD in genetics, but I really do much more geological things these days. In 1999, I was a recipient, one of several, of the President's Medal of Science from Clinton, William Clinton. One must, in testing any hypothesis or trying to establish it, consider all of the relevant evidence, which may come from all kinds of places, observations, measurements, and so on. And insofar as people can be objective at all, they will come to the same sorts of conclusions. So science is a fundamentally useful and accurate and universal way of finding out about the world. A scientist has no better friend than valid critics, appropriate critics to whom they respond. And if the criticisms lead to abandonment of the hypothesis because it doesn't fit, because the facts don't fit the idea, then the hypothesis must be abandoned and replaced with something more adequate. They state these conclusions for which there's virtually no evidence, and then they ignore conclusions that can be drawn from the evidence. This is not a scientific procedure at all. So we're not doing science here. We're not doing bad science. We're just not doing science at all, is my claim.
My name is Casey Pfeiffer. I am a registered professional structural engineer in San Diego, California. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering at the University of Notre Dame. I have been practicing engineering for 15 years, and currently I am the principal of Pacific Coast Structural Engineering in San Diego, California. About partway through the day, I was told that the buildings collapsed, that the towers collapsed, and I didn't really give too much thought to it because it just didn't make any sense to me. I thought maybe that the buildings had a partial collapse or just folded over or something along those lines. And then whenever I went home, I was amazed and shocked that they actually collapsed, that they collapsed all the way down in the fashion that they did. And I couldn't put it together in my head as to how this could have happened. And even days after, weeks after, people that are not familiar with structural engineering would ask me, and I had a hard time giving them any kind of real explanation because I didn't know a lot of what's going on. And in order for the Building 7 to collapse in the 6 seconds that it took, based on the video evidence, there would have to be a failure of over 400 steel connections per second. If you were to look at a standard moment frame steel connection, which is a welded connection between the beam and the column, it would take on the order of around 500,000 pounds to shear off one connection. And if you multiply that by 400, put maybe a safety factor of 4, you would require 50 million pounds of force per second in order to collapse the building the way it was shown based on the NIST report and what we saw on the video evidence of the video of the building that day. It's highly unlikely. Don't know how that could ever happen without secondary explosions. It's not logical or reasonable.
I have discovered another piece of information that may or may not shed some light on it, but there's a reference that I looked up that was written in 1986 by the project manager at Frankel Steel Limited, and I would assume that he knows what he's talking about when it comes to World Trade Center 7. He was the project manager on that building. And his short paper, which was presented to the Canadian structural engineers, indicates shear studs on the girders that NIST indicates there were no shear studs on, and that's what caused the initiation of collapse, or that had a large part in the initiation of collapse. So we have conflicting information. The question of the shear studs, the easiest way that it would have been to resolve that would be to examine the steel, except that the steel was picked up and carted away before anybody got a good look at it. And the destruction of evidence was a criminal act in itself.
My name is Stephen Dustewald. I'm a licensed professional structural engineer with 37 years of experience in the structural field. I have 25 years of experience as owner and principal of my own structural engineering firm here in Las Vegas. I have focused on nuclear power plant design, large commercial and industrial buildings, and utilizing design of all 4 major structural materials: concrete, steel, masonry, and wood. I think that the NIST model is flawed. Of course, they won't release all of their parameters that they use to model the collapse. The actual failure mode of the structure showed that the connections were failing at over 400 connections per second for building number 7 and a similar number for buildings 1 and 2. This is in direct physical contradiction to the design of the building, which would assure that the members went through large elastic and plastic deformations before the connections would fail. In fact, the connections are designed with a safety factor of 1.5 to 3 times the failure load for the member. So this assures that the member will always fail first in an elastic mode and then a plastic mode, and after the member has failed, then the connection would still be intact. So the failure of all these connections as the primary means of structural failure is inconsistent with a natural gravitational collapse and indicates the presence of other agents which would dismember these connections.
And you see an example of a buckled beam right here.
And actually, as the as the temperature of the steel gets warmer, it actually absorbs more and more energy because it's able to flow in a semi fluid sort of a way, and so the steel distorts and expands, but there's enough redundancy where really nothing dramatic will happen. And if it happens, it will happen when it's cooling down. That's when you get the differential movement, and things are starting to get more cooler and more rigid, and then that's when the cracking starts. But even so, that cracking is localized, and it doesn't bring down the whole structure.
Now that we have a basic understanding of the controversy surrounding the collapse of Building 7, it's time to re-examine the destruction of the Twin Towers. Let's begin by delving a little deeper into a scientific paper of monumental importance entitled Active Thermetic Material Discovered in Dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center Catastrophe. The significance of this paper is not because it changed our understanding of science, but because the scientists involved employed universally accepted techniques and state-of-the-art equipment to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that all 3 towers were demolished with explosives. Not only did the researchers find residue from thermetic reactions, including iron-rich microspheres, but they also found chips of unreacted nanothermite. Since the implications of their research is so significant, let's meet 3 of the scientists who made a contribution to the paper.
My name is Stephen Jones, a physicist. I received my PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University in 1978, so I've been at this for over 30 years, studying various subjects. I like to study those things that have an impact on society wherever I can, such as fusion energy. That's been my bread and butter for many years. In fact, began that probably in about 1979, my research into fusion, various kinds of fusion, starting with hot fusion, then muon catalyzed fusion, metal catalyzed fusion. And I'm still very interested in alternative energy methods. I've published papers in Scientific American, which was a paper about muon catalyzed fusion. I've published papers in Nature, a British publication, and several papers there. I published in Physical Review Letters. And so I have some awareness of the importance of peer review, and I can say, in all honesty, that my first paper on 9/11 research met with considerable flack. Kevin Ryan, chemist, is trying to make this nanothermite, but it's not easy. We do have descriptions from the Livermore National Laboratory in particular of how they fabricated this material, but to fabricate it is not so easy. First of all, the iron oxide grains are uniform and approximately 100 nanometers across. That's very tiny, much smaller than a human hair. The aluminum occurs in plates that are about 40 nanometers across. I have no idea how to make those. I mean, this is a high-tech material, and it's embedded in a carbon-rich matrix. It's very difficult to create this stuff. I don't know how to make this stuff.
My name is Niels Harriet. I have a master and a PhD in chemistry, and I'm associate professor at the University of Copenhagen, and I have been so for almost 40 years. And I'm 65. I have published close to 60 peer-reviewed papers in the best journals, and currently I'm involved with research X-ray time-resolved spectroscopy on time scales of 1/millionth of a second. This is very fast. The findings of the nanothermite in the dust is unambitious proof that something was going on September 11th which was unusual. And it is a finding which cannot be accounted for by any other explanation, any other process going on than this was deliberately put in the towers for the purpose of bringing them down. What we are dealing with, I think, in World Trade Center is modern military material which is unknown to the general public. And the red-grade chips, the unreacted nanothermite that we have found in the dust is just an indication that there is something wrong. It shouldn't be there. But my feeling presently, we are recording this in 2010, is that we haven't heard the whole story yet.
My name is Jeff Fair. I have a PhD in material science and engineering from the University of Minnesota. I have a BA in physics from Brigham Young University. I've worked with solid state reactions. I've worked characterizing materials, semiconductor materials, thin films. I currently do a lot of work with nanoparticles as well as solid state reactions. We did find small amounts of aluminum in some of the specimens. More significant probably was the sulfur content that we found. In fact, in one piece, I found a pore in the steel that had pure sulfur embedded in the pore, which I thought was very strange. And so that's when I really started looking for sulfur and finding it in more abundance. There's a version of thermite called thermate, which has sulfur in the thermate and what the sulfur does is it's sort of like salt on ice. It creates a eutectic temperature, so it lowers the melting point of steel, and in that way it can cut through the thermate can cut through the steel or melt the steel more quickly than regular thermite. The finding of aluminum in these steel samples, or what used to be steel samples, also supports the theory that thermite was used to melt the steel. So this is impossible to achieve in a normal office fire, even a jet fuel fed office fire. You wouldn't achieve the temperatures required to dissociate the calcium and the sulfur in order for the sulfur to then attack the grain boundaries of the steel and melt the steel. Just to give you a reference on the size, these particles that are in the red layer are thousands of times smaller than, say, the width of a human hair. So these are very sophisticated particles, very sophisticated materials, not materials that we would expect to find in the demolition debris of a building. In order to get that kind of consistency with shape and size and to be that small, these really are sophisticated materials and probably only developed in a laboratory. They may be processed outside of a laboratory, but they're developed in a laboratory. There were several other things that were found that we put into the paper that I think are very significant, and the conclusion of the paper really does fit well with the data that we collected. Our conclusions were that the red-gray chips are some form of thermite or a nanothermite or an energetic material which is very similar to thermite. And those conclusions are it's a very strong conclusion given the data.
My name is Mark Basile. I'm a chemical engineer. I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I've worked for about 25 years in industry, and the majority of what I do is analytical work. And figuring out what materials are composed of, why they are what they are, why they do what they do. It's basically a lot of material science is what I do. I started looking into 9/11 from the beginning. I had some serious questions based on some of my readings. An example there would be the R.J. Lee report, and then the FEMA report, Appendix C specifically, that got into some metallurgical analysis of some steel beams that were found from the World Trade Center. location, which were actually analyzed by professors at the school that I went to, WPI. This material is not normal thermite. That's the other thing that really needs to be understood. Anybody could make normal thermite. You can get the ingredients, you can mix them together, you can make them. Any kid could basically do it if they knew the recipe. This material is composed of the real key ingredient that I don't think anybody else could really make in a convenient way is the nano aluminum. It's a controlled substance. I could go buy it, but the government limits how much I can buy of it. It's very, very difficult to produce in these sizes and to keep from reacting. It's not something that you just get at the local 5 and dime or you're going to make on your own. It's a very, very difficult to make material. And that's the one thing in there that really tells me specifically that this wasn't some guys working in caves in Afghanistan, or it wasn't, somebody in their basement doing this. This was, a massive engineering operation that made these materials. Where they came from, I don't know. I can only speculate and guess. But it wasn't something that somebody went off and made on their own. It just wasn't.
So the preconceived notion of NIST is that there's no evidence for explosives, and so there's no point in looking. That is the most unscientific thing that you can possibly think of, not to look because you don't expect to find evidence. And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-gray crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries. And so they have a lot of evidence for something they have no explanation for. They don't even look at it. They ignore it completely, ignorant, and dismiss the explosive argument. And on the other hand, give an argument that's patently false, that no scientist will accept, that fires, office fires, can bring buildings down at the speed roughly of gravity, of free fall.
And in the case of thermite, well, thermite self-consuming cutting charges have been around since they first patented in 1984. So there would be nothing left in the debris pile except some residue of molten iron.
Evidence of a thermetic reaction is corroborated by both footage of a molten substance flowing from the Twin Towers prior to their collapse, as well as the testimony of firefighters who spent the following days searching for survivors.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava.
A volcano.
I'm Kathy McGrade. I have a bachelor's in metallurgical engineering from New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, which I got in 1979. I then spent the next 30 years with 3 startup companies. The first one was named Starstruck, and we built a rocket system for delivering satellites to low Earth orbit in competition with the Space Shuttle, Arianespace, other government-funded launch systems. The second was named Metcal, and in that company we melded together 2 different rather obscure material properties to make a heating device that would self-regulate the temperature without having a thermocouple feedback loop. It's self-regulated as a matter of the material property itself. The third company was named Crystalloom, and there we used chemical vapor deposition. We applied that to methane gas, broke open the methane molecule, and deposited diamond down as an engineering material, thin film diamond. Then after those 3 startups, I did my own company, which is fail-safe testing. That's what I'm still doing. I took a non-destructive testing technique called acoustic emission, and I applied it to fire service aerials to determine the structural integrity, to evaluate the structural integrity of their aerial ladders. The way I got into 9/11, doing 9/11 research, was when a friend asked me if fire can melt steel. And he was referring to 9/11, asking, can office fires melt steel? And no, it can't. Not an office fire. A blast furnace can melt steel because you're driving lots of oxygen into a closed furnace where you're capturing the heat and driving oxygen in. In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel. And yet we have evidence of molten iron in the microspheres, in the rubble pile, and the metal pouring out of the side of the tower. And the more and more I looked into it, the more I was horrified by what I saw. One thing I would like people to know is that you don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Do you see the top 15 stories crushing the 95 stories below? No, you don't. The top block disintegrates by itself in the first few seconds without even impacting the building below. And then the building below begins to destroy itself. What you see are waves of explosions ripping the building apart.
In the aftermath of 9/11, New York City Fire Commissioner Tolman von Essen ordered the surviving firefighters to provide an account of their experiences in order to preserve their memories. In 2006, while reviewing these testimonials, Canadian academic Graham McQueen discovered that over 100 firefighters had described hearing and seeing explosions that day. The following is just a sample of the testimonials that McQueen cited in a paper he wrote entitled 156 Eyewitnesses Whose Statements Are Suggestive of Explosions in the Twin Towers. We were there, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then I just remember there was just an explosion. It seemed like on television they blow up these buildings. It seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. How did you know it was coming down? That noise. It was a noise. What did you hear? What did you see? It was a friggin' noise. At first I thought it was... Do you ever see professional demolition where they set the charges on certain floors and then you hear pop, 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 pop? That's exactly what, because I thought it was that. When I heard that friggin' noise, that's when I saw the building coming down. For those individuals who mock 9/11 conspiracy theorists, I think it's important to realize where these theories originated from, because they were not simply fabricated by some misguided fool. In reality, and quite tragically, the first 9/11 conspiracy theorists were the firefighters themselves, and it was their commanding officers gathered at Ground Zero who began a debate whether or not to send more of their men into the North Tower, since many of them at the time were convinced that the first tower had been demolished with explosives. About a couple minutes after George came back to me is when the South Tower, from our perspective, exploded about midway up the building. We all turned and ran. At that point, a debate began to rage because the perception was that the building looked like it had been taken out with charges. And at that point, many people had felt that possibly explosives had taken out 2 World Trade, and officers were gathering companies together, and the officers were debating whether or not to go immediately back in or wait to see what was going to happen with 1 World Trade. The debate ended pretty quickly because 1 World Trade came down. Thus, the first 9/11 conspiracy theorists were not wearing tinfoil hats, but rather the helmets of the New York City Fire Department.
We was in the lobby and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like?
Horrible. The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the...
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. Because we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking plane blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary?
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second one it was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one. That's right. Everybody was inside the building, waiting to go upstairs, and they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you're telling me is that there was plane or whatever hit the building, and then the secondary explosion?
There was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. Then they exploded. And the whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside.
Since observation is the starting point of science, let's next reconsider NIST's claim that the fires in the World Trade Center were so intense that the building's interior columns had melted.
The jet fuel, for a few moments, it was a hotter fire than would normally be experienced in the standard time temperature curve for fires. But that quickly dissipated, and the overall effect of this jet fuel in the total duration of, say, 0 to 1 hour, or just before the buildings collapsed, was relatively insignificant. The difference, maybe it was 5 or 10% more BTUs in the whole floor area. But that's, in the whole scheme of things, it's insignificant, because the fire loading could be increased by a factor of 10, and this still wouldn't have been a difference as far as the building surviving. When the planes made impact, the fuel that was in the tanks of the aircraft was instantly atomized, and that was like a blowtorch on those first and second floors. That it blew a lot of the office contents right out the other side of the building. So that reduced the fuel load right there to some extent. And it was a hotter fire for maybe a couple minutes, but if you integrate that heat input over time, overall it was less than the standard time temperature curve that structures have to meet when they're tested by underwriters' laboratories. The media portrayed these fires as being extremely hot, but in going into the NIST reports with a licensed chemical engineer who normalized all the data, the fires were not that hot in World Trade Center 1 and 2. And if you look at the NIST's own data, you could see this. And to use our own powers of observation, you could tell by seeing these fires, seeing black smoke come out the windows, that means that the fires were oxygen starved. So the heat did not reach the temperatures that it could have reached if all this black soot actually burned. The fuel just sort of gave up heat to vaporize some of these constituents into black smoke, and it was incomplete combustion. And so it was a low temperature fire. And that was obvious by looking at the pictures, seeing the black smoke. The combination of the normal office fire loading and this extra input of jet fuel for that spike, initial spike, it still didn't add up to a very significant fire load, nor a very significant fire. And we could see that by, again, looking at the evidence. The fire did not spread vertically in World Trade Center 1 and 2. It didn't spread from up above the impact floors. It more or less stayed there because it was a pretty well designed building.
We had designed the project for the impact of our largest airplane of its time, the Boeing 707. That is to take this jet airplane, run it into the building, destroy a lot of structure, and still have it stand up.
Well, 13,000 tons is a lot of force. People always talk about an airplane crashing into a building. And in 1944 or 45, a plane did crash into the Empire State Building. But the largest aircraft flying today, at least commercially, the 747, fully loaded, is on the order of 300 tons. So if you think about a 300-ton element crashing into a building that's been designed to carry 13,000 tons, you can see that an aircraft crashing into the World Trade Center would probably not do anything to the major building. It could affect localized structural elements, could knock out a column, and there could be some damage. But as far as a plane knocking a building over of that type, that would not happen.
One of the really interesting photos that sticks in my mind, other than the collapse itself, is a picture of a young lady. She's standing Edna is standing at the lower opening, this gash in the side of the World Trade Center, and her body language is one of, "I'm safe here. I'll just wait to be rescued," because the air was rushing in at her back, so it was relatively cool. She's standing unprotected, no protection from the heat at all. And this was moments before this thing came crashing down with her and approximately 400 or 500 more first responders in that building. And they all had faith that this building was not going to come down. Just like the fire department fought bigger fires in the World Trade Center in previous years. And they knew the building is not going to come down from this fire.
One firefighter who had faith that the towers weren't about to collapse was Battalion Chief Oriel Palmer. After making his way to the impact zone, Palmer quickly assessed the situation and, with over 20 years of firefighting experience, deduced the following.
As Chief of Battalion 7, Palmer was amongst the first to arrive at the scene. As he entered the South Tower, he single-handedly fixed an elevator and took it to the 40th floor, halfway to where almost 700 people were struggling to stay alive.
And then he started to climb on foot. And because he was a very, very fit man, he was able to make tremendous progress. He had run marathons, he ran half marathons.
We're on the 43rd floor. There's stairway B. What floor is we trying to get up to, Oriel? I'm up to 5'5".
He went 12 floors in 10 minutes, wearing all the bunker gear, which is 50 or 60 pounds.
We're going to have to host it. I'm on 69 now, so we need to higher back, please. These stairway walls have been compromised on 73 and 74. Walls are breached, so be careful. Okay. That's floor. 6 more to go.
During his ascent, Palmer discovered that one stairwell, the south, was still intact all the way to the impact zone and beyond. For the hundreds trapped there, this stairwell could have been an escape route.
What's there here, Oriel? South Tower, South Tower. We got 2 isolated pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. Where you know that? 78th floor, numerous 1045 coal lines. 478. Got a fire here. Numerous civilians. There's 2 engines up here. All right, 10-4, we're on our way.
Maybe the firefighters struggling up the stairs with their heavy packs felt reinvigorated upon hearing Chief Palmer's familiar voice crackling over their radios, knowing that he was already up top and had a plan in place to put out the isolated pockets of fire. However, as fate would have it, less than 1 minute after Palmer radioed down for support, the unthinkable happened.
Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daly down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
It
Thanks
has
very much,
completely
Dan.
collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
Although most of the heroes on 9/11 never had an opportunity to share their story, one individual who did was the last man to exit the South Tower before it collapsed, the Keymaster, William Rodriguez. Now, the only reason Rodriguez survived was because he was running a little late that morning. So rather than taking the elevator upstairs to the restaurant where him and his ill-fated co-workers usually met for breakfast, he went straight down to the basement to report for duty. Although William felt horrible because he was running a bit late that morning, his supervisor told him not to worry and reminded him that nobody else wanted his job anyway. Now, the reason that nobody wanted his job was because Rodriguez was the janitor responsible for cleaning the staircases in a building that had 110 floors, not including the basement levels.
6 sub-levels at the World Trade Center, B1, B2, all the way down to B6. Our support office was on B1. Now, Building 1, North Tower, and the South Tower connected through the basement. As I'm talking to the supervisors, F-46, we hear boom! Huge explosion. It was so hard that pushed us upwards from the floor. We went up. All the walls cracked. The false ceiling completely fell down. The sprinkler system got activated. And there was screaming all over. And at that moment, I thought that it was a generator that blew up on the B2 level because we had the mechanical room with all the pumps, all the electrical power for the building was located in there. So it made not only sense, but remember, I was in the building for 20 years. I could tell the difference of something coming from the bottom and something coming from the top. So when I went to verbalize that something blew up probably in the mechanical room, we hear, "Pa!" all the way on the top. The impact of the plane. 2 different events. There was an explosion in the basement prior to the tower being hit by a plane.
Not knowing what was happening, Rodriguez began assisting the injured up to the ground level and then outside, where he saw one of his supervisors. Although William was directed to evacuate the area immediately, he refused to comply and instead ran back into the building where he noticed a unit crew of firefighters trying to access an elevator. After informing them that the elevator was broken, he told the firefighters to follow him into the staircase. Not only did William know the building better than anyone, but he was also one of only 5 people who had a master key. As the crew of firefighters weighted down with gear steadily made their way up the stairs, William moved ahead, unlocking doors and providing direction to disoriented people.
So I make it to the 39th floor. On the 39th floor, from the opposite side of the stairwell, comes David Lim with 2 fire chiefs, because they have the white shirts, and we all gathered together to talk about what we were going to do next. And at that moment, bah! We hear the impact of the other tower, and inside of the building, we hear boom, 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 boom. And on the radio, we hear, we lost 65, we lost 65, meaning the 65th floor collapsed, floor by floor by floor, up to the 44th floor. We're on the 39th floor. 5 flights away.
Holy shit, man.
That's the other building. That's terrorist. Other building? That's terrorist.
Upon encountering a person in a wheelchair, William assisted some firefighters to carry the individual down the stairs to the ground floor. Then, after getting the person to safety, William turned to go back into the building. But before he had a chance, the North Tower began to collapse in front of him. Diving under a vehicle to hide, William suffered burns to his body from the fire-hot gusts of wind emanating from the falling tower. Now, you would think that following 9/11, William Rodriguez would have been celebrated as a national hero, that they would have built statues at Ground Zero in his honor, that they would have made a Hollywood movie about his heroic deeds. However, this was not the case, because anytime someone put Willie in front of a camera, all he really wanted to talk about was how the official story made no sense. When finally interviewed by federal investigators, not only did Rodriguez tell them about the explosions he had heard, but he also gave them the names of 27 other people whom had experienced similar anomalies. Yet when the 9/11 Commission report was finally released, amongst the hundreds of pages, his testimony was nowhere to be found. Moreover, as he eventually discovered, not one of the people whom he told the investigators to talk with were ever even contacted by the 9/11 Commission.
I think that the 9/11 Commission report is a farce. I think that the members that conducted it have conflicts of interest directly relating to not just our government, but corporations intertwined with our government. I think it's a farce. I think we're being lied to. There's not a word in it about Building 7. Why?
My name is Robert McCoy. I'm an architect, a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of California in Berkeley in 1963. Been licensed in California since about 1964. From about 1965 until about 1985, most of my experience has been in high-rise, multi-story steel buildings. Let's go back again to the top of the building. Remember I mentioned that the top began to buckle over and twist. If this building were truly severely damaged at the floors where the plane went through and came down as an intact block above that, I would have expected that continuation, the twisting and the tipping to have continued. I really would have expected the top section to have continued to veer off in the direction it was headed. It would have gone over the edge and started down top first. That didn't happen.
In reviewing the South Tower and watching the upper 30 stories tilt to approximately 22 degrees, you're surprised that the tilting stops. The tilting is actually arrested. According to Newton's law of physics, a body that goes in motion will stay in motion unless it's interrupted by another force. So it's fairly obvious that those upper floors, as they were tilting, their motion was interrupted by what appears to be a series of explosions. And it's logical in my mind that those upper floors could separate from the top of the tower and fall as one single piece down to the ground, and you would see that full mass of the building. Although mangled, you would still see it on the ground.
I'm David Chandler. I have a bachelor's degree in physics from Harvey Mudd College and a master's in education from Claremont Graduate University and another master's in mathematics from California Polytechnic University.
Notice the numerous explosions on the west side of the building above the impact point. As the top 30-floor section falls, it tips to the east. It starts off intact, but then it disintegrates in midair. Gravity alone could not cause the top section to disintegrate. When an object is in free fall, there are no internal stresses. It should have hit the ground in one piece, but it didn't. Some of the debris is clearly being accelerated by forces other than gravity. These effects can be caused by late firing explosives, which can produce a white smoke trail. White smoke, consisting of aluminum oxide, is a byproduct of the thermite reaction. This one stopped midair and changed directions. Even taking perspective effects into account, this projectile lost one component of momentum and gained another. That requires an impulse. Note that the rocket trail does not point back to the building, but the point where the impulse occurred. Let's take it from the top. There's a lot going on. Watch for the smoking guns. The starting point in science is observation. What you are seeing here is what happened to the North Tower of the World Trade Center, the second of 3 buildings to collapse on 9/11/2001. I use the word collapse, but words can be deceptive. What do you really see happening here? There's a tremendous amount of falling debris, but under the canopy of debris, do you see the rapid sequence of explosive ejections of material? Some of the jets have been clocked at over 100 miles per hour. I will call them explosions because it's hard to find other words that describe what we are seeing here. The explosions are not isolated and few. They are continuous and widespread. They move progressively down the faces of the building, keeping pace with the falling debris. Perhaps you can imagine a natural cause, but I can't. Notice that the explosions are occurring on multiple floors at once, over a wide zone, not in a floor-by-floor sequence that might be explained by pancaking collapse. Notice there are explosions far below the point of collapse. Some are isolated and focused. These are often referred to as squibs and are commonly seen in controlled demolitions. However, this is not a standard controlled demolition. The building is being progressively destroyed from the top down by waves of explosions, creating a huge debris field. The destruction is in waves, not just in one wave. Most obvious is a rapid sequence of explosions near the visible corner of the building. But simultaneously, we can see another wave of explosions much further down the face of the building under the canopy of falling debris. Notice that both waves of explosions progress down the face of the building, nearly keeping pace with the falling debris just a few feet away. Slabs of concrete did not fall to the ground and smash to dust. There is almost no concrete in the rubble pile. Notice that the concrete is being forcefully ejected outward from the sides of the building, already pulverized to dust. Notice that embedded in the dust clouds are huge girders and entire sections of steel framing that are being hurled out of the building. The horizontal speed of some of the girders has been clocked at over 70 miles per hour. Some of these girders impale themselves in the sides of neighboring buildings. Some landed as much as 2 football fields away from the base of the tower. What could hurl heavy girders with such force and give them such speed? Some people have suggested that the weight of the tower crushing down on the girders caused them to flex, and they sprung sideways by a spring action. But we are not seeing isolated jumping girders. We are seeing a major fraction of the mass of the building, steel, concrete, office furniture, and the remains of human beings, reduced to small pieces of rubble and fine dust, and being explosively ejected in all directions. Bone fragments are found on the roofs of adjacent buildings. The bones were not crushed in the falling mass, or they would have been trapped in the debris pile. They were pulverized along with everything else and blown out in all directions.
Watching the towers come down in 10 to 15 seconds was a little bit alarming, to say the least. And seeing all of the debris that was shooting out for hundreds of feet in all directions was also a little bit alarming.
I was surprised to see the upper floors of the North Tower, the upper 15 floors of the North Tower, implode prior to any destruction of the tower below. because it would be logical that as a result of the plane crash that the upper 15 floors would start to damage the floors below, not the floors above. It's not rational to think that the floors above would start imploding prior to starting to affect the lower floors.
Yeah, if you have this block continuing to accelerate, it's telling you that it never actually impacts anything. When a hammer hits a nail, the hammerhead slows down. When a football player goes to tackle another football player, they collide, and the one that's running gets slowed down by the one he's running into. So whenever you have these interactions, they work both ways. And the same thing here is the top section, if it actually collides and actually exerts a force on the lower section, it's going to experience the countervailing force that would actually slow it down in the process.
And our point was, how about Newton's third law? If you have a force down, there has to be an equal and opposite force up. That's Newton's third law. It's one of the fundamental laws of physics and mechanics and structural engineering. So if there's a force on the building below exerts a force upward on this block, you see. So what happens now when you have these equal forces is, sure, you get destruction, but you get destruction both ways. If, for instance, the North Tower, you look at that upper block and it's being demolished, just as you expect from the third law, really. I mean, you get both ways, but it's weaker above, so you expect that upper block to be demolished. That's what happens if you look at it. I mean, does anyone look at the data? I mean, do we just pull some idea out of the blue and say, well, this is how it happened? No. We say, no, I want to see data. I want you to explain to me how your explanation fits the data. And if it doesn't fit the data, I'm going to throw it out. I'm a scientist. That's what I do. Not because it's politically correct or incorrect. I don't care about that. Your explanation has to fit the data. That's what I like. Data and correspondence with explanations.
Another way to see this is let's assume that these things did crush each other. Forget the evidence. The evidence is it didn't. But say they did. The top section, pushing on the bottom section, it's going to meet equal forces as it goes. Both sections are going to be demolished at the same rate. So by the time you've crushed up 15 stories below it, the top 15 stories are also going to be crushed. And so there's nothing left now to crush the rest of the building. So there's so many paradoxes here. A little tiny chunk of the building can't possibly fall and crush the entire structure below it.
I am Richard Heumann. I am a retired professional electrical engineer. I went to Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute and received the Bachelor of Electrical Engineering degree in 1954. I worked for Joseph Loring for 41 years and was Principal Chief Electrical Engineer for the World Trade Center complex. I was trained in Fort Belvoir School to use demolition practices on bridges and other structures, and as well as roadways. On September 11th, I was watching live TV from my kitchen and saw the whole thing. I saw the repetition of the actual incidents. And thereafter, I was in a state of shock because it was unbelievable to me, knowing the strength of the structures, that a single incident of a plane impacting and fuel burning would be the reason for the towers to collapse. I just did not believe it. It was like a dream, a nightmare. I was watching, reviewing again and again when they repeated the collapse of the towers. I noticed in Tower 1, unless my eyes were deceiving me, before the tower started collapsing from the top, the antennas started to fall.
continually trying. Okay, that's great. Also, would you make everyone aware that we're going to be seeing some tape?
And the antenna, of course, was over the middle of the elevator shafts. And I could see that antenna just falling down through the shafts directly to the bottom before the entire tower did collapse. And I questioned too, why the tower started collapsing from the top down. Why not at the point of impact? That didn't make sense to me at all. The plane, the fuel, and the fire that emanated was not sufficient to bring those towers down alone.
Those buildings in New York have a very strong exterior skin. The columns are 3'4" on center, and they're about 14 inches wide. There's about a 42-inch spandrel at each floor of steel. So the net opening where the window is, by the time you discount the fireproofing and the rest of it, is 40 or 50% of the exterior skin. When those planes hit those buildings, they were shredded the moment they started into the building. The fireball was on the outside. The impact, shredding the plane, will create enough heat to explode that fuel. And that fuel moving at 550 miles an hour as it goes through, as whatever's left going through the building or on the outside is seeking oxygen to explode and burn. It was gone in moments after it hit the building. Now keep in mind that the steel that's supporting this building in the middle is very strong. Those columns were probably 4 times as strong as they needed to be to support the dead weight above them. So now you have this building coming down in a staccato pancaking effect, or that's what we're led to believe, and the columns below just simply not there, not resisting it, not stopping it. And when you get to the bottom of the building, they're huge columns, huge. Where were those columns? Why weren't they resisting and punching through the mass of the building coming down from above? Where were they?
I'm Jerry Lobdell. I'm a retired physicist and chemical engineer. I have a BS in chemical engineering from Texas Tech, and I have extensive coursework in mathematics and physics from the University of Texas at Austin. I've had broad experience in analysis and applied research, 30-year professional history spanning physics, chemical engineering, statistical analysis and modeling, and operations research. Most of my work over the years was classified defense work. And in my retirement years, I've been devoting time to continued problem solving in areas that I find of interest. So when you consider that on 9/11, 3 steel frame buildings were destroyed and they fell symmetrically, each one of them fell symmetrically and produced a debris field that was symmetric, it boggles the mind to imagine that 3 of those things like that could happen when before that there had never been a collapse of a steel frame building at all. Not a single one anywhere, and there were plenty of fires of steel frame buildings where the building survived and was refurbished. So to find that 3 of these things collapsed in the same business complex on a single day, that's statistically impossible. The FEMA report also mentioned intergranular melting and sulfidation of the steel. And that's not consistent with any kind of regular fires, any kind of fires from fuel or other things that might be burning. You have to have an extremely hot fire for this sort of thing to happen, and you certainly are not going to get any melting, no intergranular melting, unless you have something much hotter than a regular fire. I want to talk a little bit about thermate. Thermate is made from thermite, and the way it is made, you add 31.4% by weight of sulfur into the mixture of thermite, and that becomes thermate. And the reason thermate is of interest to us is because it lowers the melting temperature of the steel to about 1821 degrees Fahrenheit. In the World Trade Center 7 situation, FEMA even found sulfur in steel, and they didn't understand what it was doing in there. And their report mentions that it was a big mystery as to why it was in there. Well, it was in there because it was thermate that was used to melt that particular piece of steel that they were testing. Now, why do you think thermite might be used in the destruction of the World Trade Centers? The reason is that columns must be cut with cutter charges before the high explosive demolition choreography is applied to assure the proper symmetric collapse. So all of these things that I've been talking about were contained in this paper that I wrote and published in the Journal of 9/11 Studies. And there's not a single thing in my paper that supports the NIST theory.
In the case of thermite cutting charges, you would have heard far less noise since they are worked by thermal heating, melting of the steel, rather than an explosive cutting as in RDX charges. After the prepping work has been done, then it's time to load the building. And in the case of a steel frame building, that means we load them with RDX cutting charges, which are loaded with individual delays, sometimes as many as 2 to 3 different delays on a given floor. So you have to understand the work is complex and precise and requires years of experience.
My name is Les Young. I'm a licensed architect in both New York State and in California. I've been involved in many large projects, including overseeing several high-rise buildings ranging in size from 14 stories to 40. Over the course of 20 years, I'm mainly called in to help with very large, difficult projects. What a lot of people I don't think realize is that the majority of the jet fuel was burnt up instantly in the big fireball, and it was gone. The fires that were left were office furnishings and carpet and things like that. A lot of things in these kind of buildings have to be fire resistant by nature. It's required by code. So there really isn't a whole lot of fuel in there to begin with. But the jet fuel argument just doesn't cut it with me, because when that big fireball came out of both the towers, that was the jet fuel, and it pretty much was over at that point. And it, again, when I watched them fall, I could not see how those massive, very thick columns could just snap like that. I would have expected most of them to stay intact with the floors collapsing around them. And what we should have had was a bunch of floors pancaked at the bottom with these spikes sticking out. But the fact that it was all reduced to rubble and powder just did not make sense at all. And the way the beams and the window mullions and things went up and out, that kind of stuff can't happen with just pure air pressure of floors getting sandwiched together. And also knowing the melting temperatures of steel and kerosene and jet fuel, knowing that it takes a blast furnace with air blowing with blowers to try to get steel to melt. I knew that the steel couldn't melt and become molten with those kinds of materials just burning in open air. Just a lot of things didn't make sense.
I'm Dr. Bob Bowman, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. Flew 101 combat missions in Vietnam and directed all the DoD Star Wars programs under Presidents Ford and Carter. My PhD is in aeronautics and nuclear engineering from Caltech, and I did my postdoctoral work at the von Karman Institute in Brussels, Belgium, in finite element analysis. I taught at 5 colleges and universities, serving as department head and assistant dean. Finite element analysis is the solution of complex physical problems using advanced mathematics, things like turbulent flow or structural failure. I first became aware that there was a problem with the government's official conspiracy theory on 9/11 that very morning when I was watching what was happening on television, and my wife says I kept saying over and over, "Where are the interceptors?" And then, of course, when the first of the towers actually started falling down, I just said, "This can't happen. It can't happen." And then the other tower came down, and I said, "This violates the laws of physics. It can't happen." Those aircraft and those fires could not cause those buildings to come down in that way. So I guess I was a very early skeptic.
I'm Tony Zambodi. I'm a mechanical engineer from the Philadelphia area with over 20 years of experience in the aerospace industry, where I design structures for aircraft and spacecraft and support equipment. I started looking at the building collapses that occurred in New York City on September 11, 2001, after reading a paper from a BYU physics professor, Dr. Stephen Jones, where he discussed what seems to be huge amounts of molten metal found in the rubble of just the 3 buildings that collapsed. After reading Dr. Jones's paper, I was taken aback, obviously shocked, and decided I needed to look at this myself. And that started 4 years ago in early 2006. Since then, I've written several papers due to my own research on the subject, and I've come to the conclusion that what we've been told as to how these buildings did collapse is false. What many people don't realize is these buildings are built to handle several times the load above them. And in fact, in the towers, the central core had a factor of safety of 3-to-1 against gravity collapse, and the perimeter columns 5-to-1 when you were only considering gravity, because they also had to be designed for high wind loading and seismic loads. Well, there was no earthquakes and there was no high winds on September 11, 2001, so those perimeter columns could handle 5 times the load above them, and the core columns could handle 3 times the load above them. National Fire Protection Association Guide number 921 calls for saving the evidence and being prepared to justify why you wouldn't. It also calls for testing for accelerants and explosives when high-order damage is involved. And this did not do this. Aside from this one small piece that was found to have intergranular melting, incredibly, none of the other steel from World Trade Center 7 was saved for analysis. This is disconcerting, considering World Trade Center 7 would have been the first steel-framed high-rise building in history to ostensibly collapse due to fire.
We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight. So some of the debris has already been removed. More of it is being removed, and it'll be done by barge all throughout the day today.
See, they roped it off to bring these things.
That's what's going on.
They certainly came at the right time to catch this.
Oh, this is going to be, yeah, they're probably, this is probably going to be to get debris out of there. Where do they come from? It's wild out here. They just keep coming. Look. It doesn't stop.
There's more. I keep thinking it's at the end, and it's not.
It's being dispatched somewhere, right? Maybe it's being dispatched from down here.
It was contrary to the way all investigations are done. If an airplane crashes, they seal off the entire area. Nobody touches anything. They move it to a secure location, and they reconstruct an aircraft. In this case, everything was scooped up, and all of a sudden they had a big incentive to recycle steel for some reason, and they just recycled it as quickly as they could, and it was a tremendous error, or whatever you want to call it, that the steel was hauled away and melted down before it could be analyzed, because here we have architects and engineers in this country have a tainted reputation that we build buildings where if a single element fails, the whole building comes down. At least that's what this says.
It's obvious because of the symmetry. The symmetry is the smoking gun. Those buildings could not have fallen in perfectly level. It's as if you take a level with a bubble in the center and watch those buildings come down, and that bubble will stay centered the whole way down. And that cannot happen with an airplane hitting one side of the building. It cannot happen that when you have asymmetric damage, you will get a perfectly symmetrical collapse. And all you need to do is look at the videos and see that. Then you have to be willing to trust what you saw and call out the lie.
When I first learned the truth about 9/11, I was a high school history teacher. However, shortly after I started talking to my students about my research, I was read a prepared statement by my principal, who warned me not to talk about my views regarding 9/11, and that I should just teach what was in the textbook. Unfortunately, the stories in the textbook were lies, and so I was forced to make some difficult decisions that not only cost me my job and my teaching license, but my reputation as well. I became a conspiracy theorist because I was labeled a conspiracy theorist by half-wits who refused to look at the evidence.
Okay, 3 buildings come down at almost the speed of free fall, which is the gravitational speed. And for 2 of them, it's because airplanes hit them. And for the 3rd one, it's a mysterious reason. That is, there's no really coherent hypothesis, except it's claimed that there are these fires in them. Now, the most obvious hypothesis for anyone looking at the films, and that was a lot of people, is that the buildings came down because there was very carefully controlled demolition with high explosives that had been planted many weeks, if not months before.
In many ways, 9/11 represents a complete and utter failure of the political system, the justice system, and the educational system. Since an informed public is essential to a functional democracy, when the public is being deceived and manipulated, then the idea that we live in a democracy becomes nothing more than an illusion. When I talk politics with someone who doesn't understand 9/11, I try to explain to them in the most basic terms that the system is broken. However, when I talk to a fellow conspiracy theorist, we have a much more sophisticated conversation about how the system functions exactly the way it is designed to. The most common tactic used by the elites to maintain control is divide and conquer. The reason that this tactic is repeatedly employed is simply because it is so effective. Ultimately, the left and right are just two wings of the same bird. And rather than helping the situation, ideologically driven people who identify as left wing or right wing have actually become the biggest obstacle to real change. If you think 9/11 is ancient history, you're wrong, because the same intergenerational cabal who pulled it off are still in control. The main difference is that now they've been collecting our data for the last 25 years and consequently know us better than many people even know themselves. And that's scary stuff.
People don't understand. There may be more. Any one of these fucking buildings can blow up. This ain't done yet.
This is on top of this. This couldn't be no worse than this. Couldn't be nothing no more worse than this. You're in the building trying to help people, and it's exploding on you inside the building. So I don't think it could get any worse than this.
Some people who realize that the official story of 9/11 is bogus will say that 9/11 was an inside job. But that is certainly an oversimplification. Although in future episodes I would like to address the question of whodunit, for now, let me just say that because various individuals, groups, organizations, corporations, and syndicates benefited from the events of that day, there is ultimately no simple answer to that question.
Nations, democracies don't go to war easily, and they usually debate and argue before they do. Sometimes they have to be bombed into going to war. In fact, that's what happened in World War II. All of Europe had been conquered. America was actually bombed in Pearl Harbor, and that was a pivotal event that opened the eyes of Americans. And once their eyes were opened, they gathered the power that is available in this great free nation, and the result was preordained. I think in a similar way, the bombing of September 11th opened the eyes of Americans to see the great conflict and the great danger that faces us. And once opened, then the overpowering will of the majority of the people of the United States, of the steamroller, is inexorably moving to decide this battle. I think this was called by Congressman Lantos a hinge of history, and it is exactly that. It is a hinge of history. And 1 year later, I can come here and say that history is moving in the right direction.
Lots of people. There's another plane coming down. See? Boom! Wow! Wow! Do you see this aircraft? I've got it all. Yo, that's terrorist shit. That is it. This is terrorist. That's terrorist. This is terrorist. Sure.
Like most authentic researchers, I believe that 9/11 was a false flag attack and a psychological operation perpetrated in order to garner support for the so-called War on Terror. It was a staged event and an exceptionally sophisticated military operation with multiple objectives. One of those objectives was to tattoo the image of the radicalized Muslim terrorist into the Western psyche, while simultaneously creating a false narrative that could then be used to justify the wars of aggression that followed. In that sense, 9/11 was also a hate crime.
And I was down at Ground Zero, several days when we watched them pull out just pieces. And it was, so emotional, and I just couldn't go there. And so I was so angry, and I just wanted, when I was told that what terrorists did it, I just wanted to attack. I mean, I was just in that mode where I wanted revenge, really, is what it came down to. And so I really couldn't go there. And my lieutenant for years had been asking me, he'd been questioning me about it. And he just pointed out things that didn't make sense. And he was talking about Tower 7 and I really didn't even know about Tower 7. I'd seen it those first few few days, but I just erased it from my memory. And now looking back on it, it was because it was shown the first few days in the media, but it wasn't ever talked about again. And it's still not really shown that often. And so he kept trying to bring that up. And I wouldn't even watch his videos. I wouldn't watch anything. I wouldn't look at the pictures because I thought he was crazy.
How do you respond to people that might say, this is just so far-fetched, it can't possibly be true?
Well, see, again, that argument is very general, far-fetched. I mean, I'm giving solid, concrete evidence. This is state-of-the-art equipment here. You know, if you can give me an argument why, what is the scanning electron microscope? Is that far-fetched? No. Is EDS far-fetched? It's used worldwide, and no, it's not far-fetched. So what's far-fetched? You know what? Tell me, is this far-fetched to make comparisons between residues from thermite and residues found in the World Trade Center? No, that's just science.
Not long after I woke up to 9/11, I was at a friend's house watching TV when a report came on 60 Minutes about flat earthers. Within days, a flat earth conspiracy theory was being promoted by all the major news outlets, and most everyone I knew was making fun of flat earthers and feeling pretty good about themselves knowing that they were not that gullible. Afterwards, when I would bring up the topic of 9/11, people would smirk and ask me if I thought the world was flat as well. Yet the flat earth phenomena was just another psyop promoted to prevent genuine conspiracy theories from gaining traction. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some folks out there who actually believe the earth is flat. What I'm saying is that it was never a grassroots movement. Rather, it was just another silly narrative thrust into the public consciousness by the same media outlets who sold the 9/11 lie to the public in the first place. Ultimately, the purpose of the flat earth conspiracy theory was to make conspiracy theorist a pejorative term by having the public conflate 9/11 truth with crazy ideas that I don't embrace or even care about. And for the record, it doesn't even matter whether you believe that a group of radical Muslims conspired to take down the Twin Towers, or if, like me, you think that there's more to the story. Either way, you believe in a conspiracy.
There was tons of asbestos in World Trade Center 1 and 2, and if they were to remediate that building in a legal way, in other words, chip away all that asbestos fireproofing, scrape it off, and haul it away to a licensed asbestos storage facility, it would cost an enormous amount of money, probably more than the building was purchased for. So again, we have a red flag of arson. In addition to the multiple fires in World Trade Center number 7, you have a profit motive.
But you could go on and on and on with a lot of names that were involved in this. But I can tell you for sure, my son, he died before the planes hit. Well, that automatically eliminates the Muslim world. Automatically eliminates the Muslim world. So I can tell you with 100% certainty, the Muslims had nothing to do with my son's death. So how do you like that?
We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
Well, I'm just confused about one thing, and one thing only. Why World Trade Center 7 went down in the first place. I'm very confused about that. I know what I heard. I heard explosions. The explanation I got was it was the fuel oil tank. I'm an old boiler guy. If it was a fuel oil tank, it would have been one side of the building. When I got to that lobby, the lobby was totally destroyed. It looked like King Kong had came through it and stepped on it. And it was so destroyed I didn't know where I was. And it was so destroyed they had to take me out through a hole in the wall, a makeshift hole that I believe the fire department made to get me out.
We are completely shocked. Completely shocked. Unbelievable.
Right, that's the view from the Palestinian side. Joining me now here in the BBC World studio is the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's in London at the moment. Mr. Barak, welcome to BBC World. First, your reaction, having heard what's happened. At least 4 planes have been hijacked, and there may be more.
The world will not be the same from today on. It's an attack against our whole civilization. I don't know who is responsible. I believe we will know in 12 hours. If it is a kind of bin Laden organization, and even if it's something else, I believe that this is the time to deploy a globally concerted effort led by the United States, the UK, Europe, and Russia against all sources of terror. The same kind of struggle that our forefathers launched against the piracy on the high seas.
What happened on 9/11 is a typical problem, reaction, solution tactic employed by the elites to manipulate the public into accepting and supporting foreign and domestic policies that would otherwise be completely unacceptable. Ironically, when a society is faced with a crisis, the people who have the solution to the problem are often the exact same people who created the problem. People need to realize that the pyramid of power does not culminate with the Prime Minister of Canada or the President of the United States. In reality, these political figures all feed from the same trough, and rather than serving the public interest, they are essentially nothing more than the interface between us and the people who actually pull the strings.
You know, the Muslims had nothing to do. And you know, I could sit here for the next 2.5 hours. I could teach a 6-month course on 9/11, why the official story isn't true. But the thing is, the 9/11 Commission book came out. I don't know how many pages it is. There's absolutely nothing true in the thing. Yet people still believe the official story.
In a concerted effort, can identify within few months the sources of this terror. They can identify the places where they are deployed on Earth. Every such a place is within certain country. The bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. There is a source of
who else
terror.
Can you identify, though? Because we're not saying he's responsible for this necessarily.
No, we don't say that he's responsible, necessarily responsible. We know where other terror thugs are living.
Hamas says it needs special equipment to retrieve the bodies buried somewhere underneath this wasteland. The UN says the debris in Gaza is so vast, it's the equivalent to 13 of the Great Pyramids of Egypt.
In standing firm politically and acting pointedly, operationally against terror. And we should cooperate with
preemptively?
Both preemptive and by diplomatic means, namely rogue states. There are 5 of them: Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea. These kind of states should be treated as rogue states.
A lot of people don't want to deal with 9/11. But the thing is, everything that happened in Iraq, everything that happened in every single country has to deal with 9/11. And I guarantee you, everyone in Congress, I guarantee you the president, everyone knows what happened on 9/11. It's so simple, it's so easy if you spend any time, unless you bury your head in the sand.
I've written to numerous engineers. I don't get a response. I've written to numerous Congress people. They won't respond. I've written to judges. They don't respond.
When I first realized that I was going to lose my teaching job because I refused to teach lies to my students, I reached out to my Member of Parliament, Charlie Angus, and I sat down with him. But when I tried to explain my dilemma, he just laughed at me. So I told him I would send him an email with links to sources that supported what I was saying. And I did, but he didn't respond.
The 9/11 Truth Movement was started by the families that lost loved ones on that day. And they were very upset at the way they were being treated and asked to be quiet. it really upset me that our own government wasn't backing these people up. And I was watching the funerals of the firefighters, and as an ex-firefighter in the firefighters union, I wanted to give my old firefighting brothers and sisters the support they needed and to back them up as an architect now, because I can't do it as a firefighter. I just felt like they were all out there alone, screaming for help, and our own country was ignoring them and ignoring their needs and not taking care of them the way we should have after that happened. And so I'm going to do everything I can to continue that fight and not give up and stand behind them 100%.
7 years after the event, we're still looking for that answer of what happened on that day.
The truth. Just give me a little truth. Tell me something that you really know.
Yeah.
And nothing that you're just BSing about the whole time. I lost my whole world, and you know why. I want to know why. They took my life away from me. I'm getting it back now, and it's coming clearer what happened. Somebody just tried to take away our world. Just like, and it's a shame. Our own people.
It's a time to launch a operational, concrete war against terror, even if it takes certain pains from the routine activities of our normal society.
You can't prove to me at all a Muslim had anything to do with my son's death. And I'm not speaking for family members, because a lot of family members would probably shoot me right now if I'm saying that. They certainly hate me for what I do. But I can prove for sure that Bobby died walking into the towers from an explosion.
Before they collapsed by pre-planted explosives.
And the way you say it, of course, if you read the 9/11 Commission report, they said fireballs were coming down, blew up everything. Well, if you understand the power of a fireball, it's nothing compared to a detonation. The injuries and the people were cut in half, tongues blown out. I hate to be graphic like that, but my son was walking in and it was like someone hit him with a shotgun. And he died instantly. And he didn't have burns on him. So how do you figure? It wasn't a fireball. If you were hit by a fireball, you burn the smithereens. So, but people don't want to hear it. I tell friends this, they just look at me, get glassy eyed, they want to walk away. It's like saying your father's a mass murderer, your father's a rapist. They just can't put their finger on it and say, my government was involved in this. They just can't do it.
When we hear information that contradicts our worldview, social psychologists call the resulting insecurity cognitive dissonance. For example, with 9/11, we have one cognition, which is what the official story of 9/11, what our government told us, what our media repeated to us over and over, that 19 Muslims attacked us. On the other hand, we have what scientists, researchers, architects, engineers are now beginning to tell us, which is that there is evidence that shows that the official story cannot be true. So now we've lost our sense of security. We are starting to feel vulnerable. Now we're confused.
9/11 truth challenges the beliefs that our country protects us and keeps us safe, and that America is the good guy. When your beliefs are challenged, fear and anxiety are created. In response to that, our psychological defenses kick in, and they protect us from these emotions. Denial, which is probably the most primitive psychological defense, is the one most likely to kick in when our beliefs are challenged.
And it's a very, very uncomfortable state to be in. And eventually our mind shuts off. Just like when a computer is overloaded, our minds get overloaded. We can't handle it anymore and we shut down.
And what some of us will tend to do is deny the evidence that's coming our way and stick to the original story, the official story, and to try to regain our equilibrium in that way. Another thing we can do is decide to look at the conflicting evidence and be sincere and be open-minded and look at both sides of the issue and then make up our own mind about what reality is. Here are a few of those spontaneous initial reactions to hearing the contradictory evidence about 9/11.
I don't want to know the truth. or I'd become too negative and psychologically go downhill. I'm not sure I want to know. If this is true, then up would be down and down would be up. My life would never be the same.
Fran, I refuse to believe that many Americans could be that satanically treasonous. Someone would have talked. But these are beliefs. They are not scientific facts. But these beliefs do keep us from looking at the empirical evidence. Whenever we say, I refuse to believe, we can be sure that the evidence that's coming our way is not bearable and that it's conflicting with our worldview much too much. As I thought about all of these responses, I realized that what is common to every one of them is the emotion of fear. People are afraid of being ostracized, they're afraid of being alienated, they're afraid of being shunned, they're afraid of their lives being inconvenienced, they'd have to change their lives, they're afraid of being confused, they're afraid of psychological deterioration, they're afraid of feeling helpless and vulnerable. And they're afraid that they won't be able to handle the feelings that are coming up. None of us want to feel helpless and vulnerable.
People want to put this behind them, I'm sure. They don't want to think about it, but it's really caused so much havoc in the whole world that I think it's to the benefit of people to just wake up and realize what's going on here and try and get some justice, try and get some honest truth, some answers.
If controlled demolition theories are correct, which I hope to God they're not, to be honest with you, but investigate it for real. Oh, wait a minute, you can't do that. There's no steel to test because it's all been shipped off to China.
I do not want to disrespect the people here. I don't want to disrespect any other family member. I can talk about Bobby. It's my job as a parent. See, now I'm getting upset. It was a murder. It was an outright murder. Okay?
And it sucks. I mean, and then to find out that after going through all that I might have been fucking lied to about what caused all of that, about what killed people that I knew. Firehouse I used to eat lunch at sometimes. Some of those guys, they're gone. I don't know. I'm mad. I'm really mad.
Why can't Americans hear about FDNY Battalion Chief Oriel Palmer, who succeeded in making it to the point of impact on the 78th floor of the South Tower with his men, and reported that he had 2 isolated pockets of fire and that we should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. So he made it up to the fire floor and he saw what was going on. And contradicting the official storyline that it was a raging fire up there. Here's a brave fireman who made it onto the fire floor and was doing his job. 1 minute after the final transmission, the South Tower collapsed.
When I heard the tapes, you were watching a screen with all the words on it, but with a digital countdown, so you knew exactly what was coming. You knew the exact minute that the towers were going to go down. And you can't help but feel like you want to jump out of your seat and say, hurry up and get out of there. You have 1 more minute before it comes down. And that's the hard part. That was the hard part. I was not surprised when I heard that Oreo had made it to the 78th floor.
You think it's whatever you want to believe. I know what I believe. I was in the building, like you said, Willie. You can't tell me nothing. You weren't next to me. I don't care what anybody says. I'll tell them. Where were you? What were you watching on TV? You telling me what was going on right next to me?
The famous expert out there.
From TV. You're giving me the insight. Yeah. Time out here. You can't tell me nothing. I was in the building. I know what I heard. I know what I seen. I know what I went through.
I want to spit on those people, you know?
Yeah. So I just walk away, Willie. Walk away. They're not worth it. What are you thinking? Who are you? What's wrong? They're not worth my time. I've been through enough. I don't need to be through him. But he wasn't with us, Willie. To be with us is to know what we went through, and for you to talk about something you don't know about, then just please leave, or I'm gonna leave one way or another.
Oh, you're taking it in a more gentlemanly way.
Yeah, it's just, you know. Maybe if I was drinking a few, I might pop them.
Before I conclude this documentary, there are just a few other things I would like people to consider. Firstly, if the cabal who perpetrated 9/11 can develop military-grade nanothermite so sophisticated that accomplished physicists such as Stephen Jones don't even know how to replicate it, then what else can these psychopaths cook up in a laboratory? Similarly, if a shadowy group of people could murder 300 firefighters in broad daylight and get away with it, then what can't they do? And finally, regarding the people who pulled it off, and I'm not talking about our puppet politicians, but rather the puppet masters who pull their strings. If there are just two takeaways that you get from this documentary, I hope it's this. Number one, do not trust them. And number two, do not underestimate them. Because they're evil. This video took a long time to slap together, and the only reason I was able to afford the time was because I blew my knee out downhill skiing. So if you learned anything from this video and want to learn some more, then let me say that any support would be greatly appreciated, because I do have a lot more to say.